The air was sharp and cold that morning in Haigerloch. A construction team, working deep beneath the hills of southern Germany, struck concrete where soil should have been. Within hours, floodlights filled the newly opened space, and the beam of a camera caught something that hadn't seen light since 1945. A lead door, a warning etched in rusted German script. Radiation meters began to hiss. Inside the sealed vault lay blueprints, film reels, and canisters marked Project Kronos. It wasn't treasure, it was evidence, hidden proof of a war's final secret, a race for power that never truly ended. Chapter 1. The Vault Beneath Haigerloch. In the spring of 1944, southern Germany was still far from the front lines. The war was turning against the Reich, but here, in the wooded valleys of the Swabian Alps, life seemed suspended in a strange rhythm. The rumble of distant trains, the smell of wet stone and iron, and the quiet determination of scientists who believed they were serving the future. Beneath the Baroque church in Haigerloch, in a cave hollowed from ancient rock, the Third Reich had hidden something extraordinary, a makeshift nuclear laboratory, part of what was known as the Uhrenverein, the German uranium club. The Allies knew fragments of the truth. They had heard whispers of heavy water, uranium cubes, and a physicist named Heisenberg. But in those final chaotic months, as Germany collapsed, much of what happened in these tunnels disappeared into silence. Files burned, orders lost, men vanished. What remained were fragments of testimony. Scientists claiming ignorance, engineers insisting loyalty, and commanders denying everything. Before the discovery in 2022, few believed there was anything left to find. The world had already judged the Nazi atomic effort as primitive, a failed dream buried by Allied victory. Yet, history has a way of holding its breath, waiting for the right moment to exhale. The Germany of the late 1930s was a nation reshaped by ambition. Factories churned day and night, their chimneys spilling smoke over cities still rebuilding from the last war. The hum of innovation filled the air. Radios, new cars, rockets, synthetic fuels. Science had become a form of patriotism. Men like Werner Heisenberg and Otto Hahn worked under the watchful eye of the Reich, their discoveries celebrated as national triumphs. But in private, many of them struggled. They were physicists, not politicians. They had seen colleagues disappear, institutions gutted, research twisted into propaganda. Still they stayed, some out of fear, others out of hope that science might outlast politics. Across Europe, the world watched Germany's transformation with a mix of awe and dread. In London, Churchill warned of a storm gathering over the continent. In Washington, Roosevelt began quietly building alliances, sensing that neutrality might not hold. And in Moscow, Stalin prepared, not for peace, but for the inevitable. Borders were redrawn on maps that diplomats would never see. The air itself seemed charged with expectation, as if the century was holding its breath. Meanwhile, in small towns like Haigerloch, the war felt distant, until it didn't. Farmers noticed the convoys arriving at night, guarded trucks moving equipment into the hills. Local children were told not to wander too close to the caves. The air smelled faintly of ozone and metal. Soldiers came and went without insignia, and within that stone chamber, under the dim glow of kerosene lamps, the future was being tested. One drop of heavy water at a time. The world before the war was full of questions no one yet knew how to answer. Could the atom, the smallest unit of matter, be broken apart? Could energy be drawn from it? Or worse, weaponized? To the scientists of the 1930s, it was both wonder and warning. They stood at the edge of something vast, unaware that within a decade, their discoveries would level cities and define an age. Yet, the story of Haigerloch was not just about science. It was about belief. Belief that knowledge was power, that power could be controlled, and that control could rewrite destiny. When the war began, that belief hardened into doctrine. Laboratories became military zones. Equations turned into classified weapons research. And while men like Heisenberg calculated neutron flux in the shadows, soldiers died on frozen battlefields thousands of miles away, never knowing that the fate of the world was being decided not by bullets, but by particles too small to see. The war was coming. And beneath the peaceful hills of southern Germany, in a town no one had heard of, a group of men prepared to change it forever, or die trying. Outside, Europe trembled. Inside, the vault walls absorbed their voices. The hum of machinery echoed like a heartbeat through stone. History, it seemed, was already listening. Chapter 2: The Race Beneath the Shadows. By 1940, the war had consumed everything. Cities burned, alliances fractured, and science, once the pursuit of understanding, had become a weapon. In Berlin, a meeting was held that would quietly alter the course of history. The subject was uranium. The goal was control. The man leading the discussion was Werner Heisenberg, Nobel laureate and physicist, who stood before a room of military officials and bureaucrats explaining, as simply as he could, that the atom could split, and that when it did, it could unleash energy unlike anything known to man. The officials didn't need convincing. They saw power. Heisenberg saw something else: danger. But it was too late. The machine of war had already decided for him. In those early years, the German atomic program, codenamed the Uranverein, was fragmented, starved of resources, and strangled by politics. Rivalries between scientists, secrecy among branches of the Wehrmacht, and the regime's own paranoia ensured that no single team ever had full control. Yet the ambition was real. Reports from occupied Norway told of heavy water production in Vemork. Laboratories in Leipzig, Dahlem, and Haigerloch experimented with uranium cubes suspended in graphite. And deep within the SS archives, Heinrich Himmler's staff drew up plans for total weaponization of atomic reaction. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain listened. The Special Operations Executive intercepted fragments of communication, references to a critical mass, uranium enrichment, and reaction stability. Churchill, ever wary, told his ministers, if they find it first, they will enslave the world. He wasn't wrong to fear it. In the United States, similar ideas were emerging. Refugee scientists, many fleeing Germany, carried warnings and notebooks filled with equations. Einstein, in his famous letter to Roosevelt, urged urgency. Thus began the Manhattan Project, a race not just against time, but against a rival none of them fully understood. Each side worked in silence, suspecting the other of progress it hadn't yet achieved. It was science as espionage, discovery turned into deception. Inside Germany, the mood was shifting. The Wehrmacht's early victories gave the illusion of invincibility. Paris had fallen. London was burning. To the Reich's leadership, the atomic project was simply another step toward inevitability. But Heisenberg knew the cost. In his diary, he wrote of sleepless nights, of equations that refused to balance, of doubt creeping into every calculation. He was haunted by a single question: if we succeed, what then? For the engineers who worked under him, those doubts were invisible. Their orders were simple: assemble, test, report. The uranium arrived in crates stamped with eagle insignias. The graphite was pure. The heavy water came by rail, guarded like gold. The experiments grew larger, riskier. There were accidents, bursts of radiation, unexplained illnesses, men who vanished after exposure. But records were falsified and silence was mandatory. The Reich demanded progress, not excuses. Elsewhere in Europe, ordinary people felt the consequences of those decisions in far simpler ways. Ration cards, air raids, sons who didn't come home. In the laboratories, though, there was still an illusion of control. The scientists told themselves they were working for the future of Germany, not its destruction. They spoke of post-war energy, of peaceful reactors, of progress that would illuminate cities instead of incinerating them. But outside their walls, reality had already overtaken imagination. By 1943, the war was turning. The Soviets had held at Stalingrad. The Allies were landing in Italy. Berlin no longer felt untouchable. And with every defeat, the pressure on the scientists grew. The regime wanted results, something spectacular, something to turn the tide. There were rumors of secret meetings between the SS and Heisenberg's superiors, discussions about testing, deployment, and targets. The line between theory and weapon had all but vanished. In Haigerloch, construction began on what would be the last and most complete version of Germany's experimental reactor. It was a cavern hidden beneath a church, accessible only through a narrow passageway carved into limestone. Inside, steel scaffolds were erected, surrounded by lead shielding and tanks filled with heavy water. The reactor itself was crude, a lattice of 664 uranium cubes suspended by cables. But it worked. The system produced measurable neutron flux. It was, by every technical measure, the threshold of controlled fission, and then the silence. No orders to weaponize, no expansion, just waiting. Heisenberg and his team continued their calculations, knowing that the front was collapsing, that Allied bombers were drawing closer each night. When questioned after the war, Heisenberg would insist that the project had never been intended for a bomb, that it had been theoretical, exploratory. But declassified OSS files tell a different story, one of intercepted communications, of shipments redirected, and of Allied intelligence fearing a breakthrough was imminent. That fear became Operation Alsos, a mission designed to capture the German atomic project before the Soviets did. American and British teams moved through Europe, seizing laboratories, interrogating scientists, and confiscating materials. In April 1945, they reached Haigerloch. What they found was puzzling. A reactor incomplete, uranium dismantled, scientists compliant. It was over, they thought, but they didn't know that another vault, one sealed deeper within the mountain, had never been opened. For nearly 8 decades, that vault would remain hidden. Its existence was mentioned only once, in a line of a confiscated field report, later redacted. It read, "Secondary chamber located, unentered, possible contamination risk." The war had ended, but the shadows beneath Haigerloch were only beginning to stir again. Chapter 3, The Chamber of Silence. The war had ended long ago when they found it again, not in the chaos of surrender, but in the quiet persistence of routine. A crew digging through rock for a new high-speed rail line, unaware they were about to reopen a wound sealed in 1945. It began with a vibration, a hollow echo that shouldn't have been there. The engineers paused. One of them struck the wall with his drill. The sound came back deeper this time, metallic, artificial. Moments later, the machine bit into concrete, and the tunnel filled with dust. They stepped into the darkness, flashlights trembling across the stone. What emerged was not a cave but a corridor. The air was still, untouched. Along the wall, faded markings, Reich symbols, chemical hazard signs, and a date, February 1945. A rusted door loomed ahead, sealed shut with welded steel. Bolted across, it was a single plaque, barely legible under decades of corrosion. Kronos, Zugang verboten. Radiation meters began to tick. When German authorities arrived, the area was cordoned off within hours. Men in protective suits descended with floodlights, cameras, and silence. The vault was opened carefully, torch by torch, the air heavy with iron and oil. Inside, the light revealed a room perfectly preserved. Metal tables, glass tubes, paper curled with age, and a central structure resembling a containment shell, its surface lined with lead. Nearby, stacked canisters bore the eagle crest and a code number, KR-12T44. Forensic analysts would later confirm it. Uranium residue. The discovery sent shockwaves through every intelligence service in Europe. For decades, it had been assumed that the German nuclear program ended in fragments. Yet here, in this forgotten chamber, were complete research logs, blueprints, and technical films, showing tests never before documented. One reel, restored weeks later by archivists, displayed an experiment carried out in the spring of 1945. A chain reaction attempt under the name Project Kronos. The narration, in Heisenberg's clipped German, described it as the final configuration. Then the film cut to black. The scientists who examined the materials spoke cautiously. The diagrams were sophisticated, far beyond what the Allies had recovered in 1945. They revealed not a weapon, but something stranger, a prototype for sustained energy production, powered by a neutron reflector made from an alloy no known laboratory had produced at the time. The implication was staggering. Either Germany had reached a technical understanding far ahead of the known timeline, or these were deliberate forgeries planted in the chaos of defeat. But by whom and why? Documents found within the same vault deepened the mystery. Letters between senior officials and an unidentified engineer referenced relocation orders and post-war continuation. One note bore an Allied seal, possibly from a British intelligence officer attached to Operation Alsos, though the signature was redacted. The phrasing suggested cooperation, not confrontation. Transfer successful, it read. Hermetic containment secure, awaiting instruction from counterpart in Zurich. For historians, it was a puzzle that reopened an old wound. Had the Allies buried parts of the German project instead of destroying them? Footage from the excavation team shows the moment the vault's inner chamber was breached. The camera shakes as a second door gives way, revealing what appeared to be a decontamination chamber, still equipped with respirators, radiation badges, and logbooks sealed in wax. One page listed personnel by initials only: H, S, K, and L. The last entry, dated April 10, 1945, read, "All components secured, awaiting retrieval. The next dawn will erase everything." It was an eerie echo of the final weeks of the Reich, the air raids, the panic, the orders burned in courtyards. Perhaps they had sealed this vault knowing the war was lost, believing that if their work survived, so might their legacy, or perhaps it was sealed by others, to ensure that legacy was never revealed. In the following weeks, radiation teams removed the remaining canisters and logs. The site was officially declared unstable, but whispers began to circulate among journalists and amateur historians. Some claimed that within the Bundesarchiv, a classified section labeled Kronos materials had already been established. Others said that American intelligence officers had quietly taken possession of certain artifacts under mutual defense protocols. When reporters asked the Ministry of Defense for comment, they were told only that no evidence of weapons research has been verified. But those who saw the footage knew better. The camera lingered on the containment shell, blackened, scarred, with the faint outline of something fused to its surface. Metallurgists would later identify it as the remnants of a thermal reaction, consistent with a small-scale neutron burst. Not enough to create an explosion, but enough to prove intent. Enough to show that, at least once, the German team had come dangerously close to achieving sustained fission. For the scientists who studied the find, the implications were less about the past and more about the choices made afterward. How much did the Allies really find in 1945? How much did they take and what did they hide? When the United States launched its post-war atomic program, dozens of German scientists quietly reappeared in American research facilities under Operation Paperclip. Officially, they were engineers, chemists, propulsion experts. Unofficially, some carried fragments of the Kronos blueprints, equations redrawn from memory. As the modern investigation unfolded, the deeper truth began to emerge. The vault beneath Haigerloch had not been a reactor chamber at all. It was a containment archive, a storage site meant to outlast the Reich itself. And someone, long after the war, had maintained its secrecy. The padlocks were old, yes, but the security seals were not. For those who entered, it became clear that this was not just an archaeological discovery. It was a confrontation with history, a moment where science, secrecy, and morality collided in the dark. In that silence, beneath the hum of radiation detectors, one question hung heavy in the air. How much of our modern world was built on what we were never meant to find? Chapter 4: Shadows of the Aftermath. When the vault was sealed again, the town of Haigerloch returned to quiet. Reporters drifted away, fences went up, and the cold stone tunnels disappeared behind warning signs and government tape. But for those who had been inside, the silence was impossible to forget. They spoke later of the smell. Burnt metal, oil, and dust so fine it clung to their skin for days. Some of them couldn't sleep. The sound of the radiation meter's steady tick stayed with them like a heartbeat in the dark. In the weeks that followed, questions flooded every historical institute in Germany. How could such a site remain hidden for so long? Who had funded it? And why, after 8 decades, were parts of the discovery still being classified? Officials answered carefully. They said the documents were under review, that the materials required scientific verification. But the tone of their statements carried the weight of something deeper. Not just secrecy, but unease. For the people of Haigerloch, the discovery was personal. This was a town that had lived peacefully for generations, known for its vineyards and church bells, not for atomic research. And yet, beneath their streets, the legacy of war had been sleeping. Elderly residents recalled stories their parents once whispered. Soldiers arriving at night, trucks moving through fog, engineers speaking with strange accents. One man remembered his grandfather warning him as a child never to play near the limestone caves. "The ground remembers," he said. Now, it seemed, he had been right. Archivists in Berlin began restoring the recovered documents. Every line of text was fragile, each page a window into the final days of the Third Reich. Among them were logs written in hurried German, recording experiments conducted under intense pressure. There were no grand declarations of conquest, just tired handwriting, measurements, corrections, and fatigue. One note read, "We are too late. The power exists, but time has defeated us." Another, unsigned, simply said, "Perhaps this is mercy." As the public learned more, the myth of German atomic superiority began to unravel in new and uncomfortable ways. The narrative had always been clean. Germany tried, failed, and surrendered before the bomb could be built. But the reality was more human and more tragic. These were men and women who stood on the edge of discovery, driven by ambition and fear, by loyalty and survival. Some believed they were saving Germany. Others knew they were serving madness. Most were just trying to live long enough to see peace again. The aftermath of the discovery reached far beyond Haigerloch. In Washington and Moscow, historians and intelligence agencies reopened long-forgotten files. Declassified memos from 1946 mentioned contaminated samples transferred under cover of Operation Eclipse. A British intelligence cable referred to K materials secured for future energy research. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Fragments of the same story scattered across nations, hidden in plain sight. It became clear that after the war, the victors had not destroyed everything. They had chosen what to remember and what to keep. For the survivors of that era, the rediscovery stirred emotions that had never fully healed. Families of German scientists came forward with letters, photographs, and diaries. Many expressed shame, some pride, most confusion. One woman, the granddaughter of a technician who worked under Heisenberg, said in an interview, "He told us he was studying light. That's all, just light." When she saw the photographs of the vault, the lead casings, the strange apparatus, she wept. I think he wanted to believe that too. Outside Germany, the world watched with a strange fascination. Documentaries aired, journalists speculated, and amateur historians built theories around every recovered fragment. Some spoke of cover-ups, others of missed opportunities. But beneath the noise, one truth endured. The discovery forced the world to face how close humanity had come, not just to destruction, but to a version of progress born from desperation. In Haigerloch, the local museum expanded to include a small exhibit. Visitors could see photographs of the 1945 reactor and the scientists who once stood beside it. The new wing was quiet. No dramatization, no flashing screens, just muted light and the hum of an air filter. On the wall hung a single quote from Heisenberg: "What we observe is not nature itself, but nature exposed to our method of questioning." It was a reminder that the search for knowledge, however noble, always leaves traces of the questions we're afraid to ask. Years passed. The vault was resealed under federal supervision. The materials were moved to secure facilities for study, but rumors persisted about the missing canisters, about strange metallic residues that didn't match known isotopes, about a classified NATO meeting discussing legacy energy containment. Each time the story surfaced, officials denied it, but the pattern was the same: quick silence, redacted statements, and a reminder that the matter is closed. And yet it never really was. In quiet moments, when historians revisit the footage from the dig site, they linger on the final scene, the moment the last floodlight goes out, and the camera captures the empty chamber. Dust floats in the beam for a second, then darkness swallows everything. That stillness, that heavy absence feels almost human, as if the place itself is waiting for someone to ask one more question. The aftermath of war isn't measured only in ruins or bodies. It lives in archives, in memories, in the soil that hides what men once built and tried to forget. The discovery beneath Haigerloch didn't change history. It revealed the parts that history had chosen not to tell. And in that revelation lies both guilt and grace. Because sometimes the most dangerous discoveries are not those we make, but those we choose to leave buried. Chapter 5: Echoes in the Cold Light. The excavation at Haigerloch faded from headlines, but its echo continued. Through conferences, documentaries, and late-night debates between physicists who saw in it both wonder and warning. The vault had been sealed once more, yet its story refused to stay underground. Every few months, another detail surfaced. A new document declassified, a photograph authenticated, a letter traced to a name long erased. Piece by piece, the mosaic of forgotten history began to form again, revealing not just what the scientists had done, but why they had believed it mattered. History, when stripped of ideology, is always about people. And in the cold light of the present, the men of Project Kronos were no longer monsters or martyrs, just human beings caught between brilliance and blindness. Heisenberg, Hahn, Deibner. Their names are written into textbooks, But the faces found in that vault were mostly unknown. Technicians, assistants, guards, each one part of a machine they could barely comprehend. The discovery forced a new question onto historians. Not, how close did they come? But, what price were they willing to pay to try? In the years since the vault's rediscovery, scientists have analyzed the surviving materials under controlled conditions. Most of it, they say, was experimental. Some, however, remains unexplained. The alloy used in the reactor's inner shell doesn't match any known wartime composition. Its isotopic fingerprint suggests post-war refinement, meaning someone, somewhere, may have reopened the research long after the Reich had fallen. That single fact changed the tone of every discussion. The story was no longer about the past alone. It was about what the past had quietly seeded in the decades that followed. Cold War archives soon offered clues. In American and Soviet records alike, code names began to appear: Mercury Glass, Eclipse Vault, Project Golem. Each one referenced recovered German materials or personnel absorbed into post-war nuclear programs. The irony was stark. The same nations that had fought to end the Reich had inherited parts of its ambition. They simply changed the flags on the doors. The vault beneath Haigerloch had become more than a sight. It was a mirror, and what it reflected was uncomfortable. That progress and secrecy, once intertwined, had never truly separated. That humanity's greatest leaps often begin with its darkest intentions. For many who study the era, that realization carries a kind of quiet sorrow, a recognition that the line between discovery and destruction was never as clear as history books suggest. Local residents sometimes visit the site on weekends. They can't enter, but a small marker stands above the sealed tunnel. Hier ruht Geschichte. Here history rests. Children leave flowers. Tourists take photographs. On calm days, the sound of the river nearby masks the hum of distant traffic. It's hard to imagine that beneath their feet, the blueprints for controlled fission once lay hidden, a secret that could have altered the fate of millions. And yet, there's something almost peaceful in that thought, that the world survived not because of genius, but because of failure. In recent interviews, one of the archaeologists from the 2022 excavation reflected quietly on the experience. He said, "When we found the door, I thought it would be just another bunker, but standing there, seeing those symbols, feeling the weight of that air, I realized we weren't uncovering the past, we were disturbing it." His words linger, because they touch on the essence of all historical discovery, that the act of revealing can also be an act of responsibility. The recovered reels are now stored in a temperature-controlled vault in Berlin, their contents digitized and restricted. Only fragments have been shown publicly, the outlines of diagrams, a few seconds of film showing the glow of uranium under test light. Yet even these glimpses carry a kind of haunting beauty. They remind us that science, stripped of morality, is neither good nor evil. It simply is. What we choose to do with it defines everything. And so the story of Haigerloch stands not as a tale of villains or heroes, but as a warning carved in stone and silence. It tells us that knowledge can be buried, but never erased. That truth waits, patient, unbending, beneath the surface of time. When it finally emerges, it doesn't shout, it whispers. As the world faces new frontiers of technology and power, the lessons of Haigerloch feel closer than ever. We still chase energy, still compete in shadows, still tell ourselves that purpose can excuse the cost. But beneath all progress lies the same question that haunted those scientists in 1945. If we succeed, what then? In the end, history isn't a line, it's an echo. And in the cold light of the present, that echo still drifts from a silent vault beneath the hills of southern Germany, carrying with it a truth that no wall or secrecy can contain. The past does not stay buried. It waits for us to listen.